Sword Art Online is the best anime.
The Calibur arc of Sword Art Online is an absolute disaster. The writing is sloppy and full of holes, the characters are shallow and uninteresting, and the story is predictable and poorly executed. What could have been an exciting, epic adventure instead feels like a slog through endless exposition and pointless filler. Every aspect of this arc just screams laziness. This arc is completely pointless. There is no reason to watch it, and I seriously doubt even die-hard Sword Art Online fans enjoy it. It adds nothing meaningful to the story and only wastes time with boring scenes and terrible pacing. The episode begins on December 28th, 2025, which is also the same day I'm uploading this video. It is wild to think that Sword Art Online, which was supposed to take place in the future, is now set in the past and present because that future has already arrived in real life. The VR technology and futuristic gadgets in the show are still completely unrealistic. But now the timeline makes the series feel even more outdated and disconnected. The author clearly picked a date without thinking, and it only highlights how sloppy and poorly planned the world building really is. What was supposed to feel visionary now just feels laughable. The episode starts with Kirito and his sister sitting and talking while eating, yet another boring exposition dumping scene in a series that is packed with them. It feels like most of Sword Art Online is just characters sitting around talking and explaining the plot instead of actually doing anything interesting. There's almost no tension, no stakes, and no real excitement, just endless dialogue that slows the story to a crawl. It makes the show feel tedious and lifeless, as if the creators relied on chatter instead of meaningful action or character development. Kirito sees an announcement that the holy sword Excalibur has been found in Alfheim Online. Wait a minute. Excalibur is from Arthurian legend, and Alfheim Online is based on Norse mythology. What is Excalibur even doing here? The author clearly did not bother with even the most basic research. It is sloppy, lazy writing that breaks any sense of logic in the world, instead of respecting the source material or creating a coherent fantasy setting. The show just throws in whatever sounds cool, no matter how ridiculous or inconsistent it is. There are plenty of cool swords from Norse mythology that could have been part of the plot, and yet the author chose one that does not even belong. Instead of picking a weapon that fit the world, they went with Excalibur, a sword from a completely different legend. It makes the story feel careless and poorly thought out, as if the author just picked whatever sounded flashy without any concern for consistency. It is yet another example of the sloppy, lazy writing that runs through Sword Art Online. Kirito is sad that someone else beat them to the sword, but his sister explains that it was found, not obtained yet. That makes absolutely no sense. If the sword has already been found, why has nobody claimed it? They know its location, yet somehow no one can get it? It is another example of sloppy logic and inconsistent writing. Scenes like this make the plot feel cheap and pointless, as if the writers are just making things up on the spot without thinking about how anything actually works. A flashback scene shows Kirito and Lifa in an underground realm called Jotunheim. But in Norse mythology, Jotunheim is not underground at all. It is one of the 9 worlds generally depicted as a wild, mountainous, and cold land, separate from Midgard, the human world, and Asgard, the realm of the gods, home to the Jitner, giants. It exists in its own distinct part of the cosmology, connected to Midgard and Asgard by Yggdrasil, the world tree not buried beneath the earth. This is yet another example of how little the author knows about Norse mythology. If you're going to write a story inspired by these legends, why change the fundamental details and make it completely inaccurate? Scenes like this show a careless approach to world building, turning what could have been a rich, mythological setting into something inconsistent and ridiculous. This show, overall, is an insult to mythology fans. What could have been an epic, exciting story filled with rich legends and clever world building has instead turned into a dumpster fire. Every inconsistency, lazy plot choice, and careless twist makes it infuriating to watch, and sitting through it feels like a chore rather than entertainment. It is the kind of show that squanders its potential and leaves anyone who appreciates real mythology shaking their head in disbelief. If the mythology guy were to make a video breaking down all the inaccuracies in this arc, it would easily stretch for several hours. That is how many mistakes, inconsistencies, and outright flubs there are. Every scene seems to get something wrong, from the lore to the characters, and the list would be endless. It is the kind of arc where even a casual mythology fan would be shaking their head non-stop. And why is the game even called Alfheim Online when it clearly includes realms beyond Alfheim? It makes no sense to name a game after just one realm. If players can travel to multiple worlds and encounter content from all over Norse mythology, and even beyond, like Arthurian legends. If the author wanted to include so many different elements, a more fitting name would have been something like Norse Mythology Online, or a title that actually reflects the variety of places and myths in the game. As it stands, the name is misleading and just highlights the sloppy world building. It is also funny how the show is called Sword Art Online, yet it seems far more interested in literally any other game. By this point, we are spending way more time in Alfheim Online than in the actual game the series is named after. Sword Art Online is supposed to be about being trapped in a deadly virtual world, where swords matter and every fight has consequences. Instead, we get fairy wings, flight mechanics, and MO nonsense that feels completely disconnected from the premise that made the series popular in the first place. At some point, the title starts to feel like false advertising. If the show really wanted to commit to Alfheim Online, then maybe it should have been honest and changed its name. Calling the series Sword Art Online while barely focusing on Sword Art Online itself is just another example of the sloppy, unfocused writing. The show constantly chases new settings instead of developing the one people actually cared about. Kirito and Lifa save a monster called Tonki. It is a combination between an elephant and a jellyfish, but this is not from Norse mythology either. There are countless fascinating monsters and creatures in the actual myths that the author could have included. Yet they chose to invent a random one instead. It makes no sense, and again shows how little care was put into respecting the source material. Creating your own creatures is fine, but when the story claims to be inspired by Norse mythology, this kind of lazy invention just feels sloppy and disrespectful. Kirito and Lifa see an upside-down pyramid hanging from the roots of the world tree. This is completely absurd. Pyramids are from Egypt, not Norse mythology. So why include one in a game supposedly based on Norse legends? And why is it even upside down? Nothing about this makes any sense. It is yet another example of the show throwing in random, flashy ideas without any thought or respect for the mythology it claims to draw from. The result is a chaotic, nonsensical setting that leaves viewers scratching their heads. Excalibur is inside the upside-down pyramid, but in Arthurian legend, this is not where Excalibur is supposed to be at all. The sword has a clear origin and story in its own myth, yet the show ignores all of that and just plops it into a completely unrelated, chaotic setting. It is another example of sloppy writing, where the creators throw together cool-sounding ideas without any concern for logic or the source material. It makes the world feel inconsistent and ridiculous. In some versions of the legend, Excalibur is the sword that proves Arthur is the rightful king. It is magically embedded in a stone or sometimes an anvil, and only the true king can pull it out. By pulling the sword from the stone, Arthur demonstrates his divine right to rule. In other versions, Excalibur is given to Arthur by the Lady of the Lake, a mystical figure who lives in a lake or body of water. This sword is magical and often has extraordinary powers, such as being unbreakable or giving its wielder great strength. Kirito never goes for the sword and just plans to come back for it someday. But if the sword is supposed to be the most powerful weapon in the game, why not go for it immediately? It makes no sense at all. The fact that there is only one in the entire game is a dumb design choice, because waiting like this risks someone else getting it first. Scenes like this highlight the show's lazy writing and careless game logic, making it frustrating to watch and completely undermining any sense of strategy or stakes. It also makes the players in the game look completely incompetent. If the sword is truly the best weapon in the game, it is absurd that nobody even tried going for it. This breaks any sense of realism or strategy within the world and makes the player characters feel lazy and clueless. Instead of creating tension or competition, the show just relies on contrived excuses to move the plot, which makes the story feel frustrating and poorly thought out. And Excalibur is not even hidden. The walls of the pyramid are transparent, so anyone can see the sword inside. This is a terrible hiding spot and completely destroys any sense of challenge or tension. If the sword is supposed to be the ultimate prize, the setup makes no sense and feels like lazy writing. It turns what should be an exciting quest into a pointless, ridiculous scene. The part where Kirito's eyes light up with the reflection of Excalibur is laughable and cheesy. It looks exactly like those bad movies where a villain's eyes gleam with the reflection of dollar signs. Instead of feeling epic or exciting, the scene comes off as over the top and ridiculous, making it hard to take the moment seriously. It is another example of the show trying to be dramatic but failing spectacularly. Kirito mentions that players cannot fly in Jotunheim, which is supposedly why nobody else saw Excalibur in the pyramid. But his sister points out that if they had saved the monster, someone else could have saved a different monster and flown to see the sword as well. Kirito is supposed to be the smartest god gamer in the game, and he did not even realize this? It makes him look clueless and undermines the idea that he is some legendary, unbeatable player. This is yet another example of sloppy writing that ignores logic just to make him look special. Preventing players from flying in certain areas is a dumb restriction for game design. If the game is built around the ability to fly, then why include that mechanic at all if you're just going to take it away in key moments? It makes no sense, and feels like the writers are imposing arbitrary rules to create artificial obstacles. Instead of creating tension naturally, the game design itself becomes frustrating and illogical, making it hard to take the world seriously. Kirito mentions that getting rare items is not the point of games, and that is a load of nonsense. Collecting rare items is actually one of the main reasons many people play games in the first place. It is a core part of the challenge, reward system, and excitement in gaming. For him to dismiss it like that makes no sense and shows how little the show understands actual game mechanics or why players are motivated. It is another example of lazy writing that insults anyone who actually knows or cares about games. You can tell the author has little to no experience with gaming. Saying dumb things like this not only shows ignorance but also insults actual gamers. It makes the game world feel fake and poorly thought out. And it is frustrating to watch someone treat core gaming mechanics like they do not matter. Scenes like this highlight how out of touch the show is with the very audience it claims to represent. Kirito and his buddies plan to complete the quest and get Excalibur. This is the same guy who is supposed to be a solo player, yet he cannot resist teaming up with others whenever he gets the chance. The writing for his character is completely inconsistent. One moment he is portrayed as a lone, unbeatable gamer, and the next he is perfectly fine relying on a team. It makes him feel flat and poorly thought out. Undermining any credibility the show tries to give him as a legendary player. We cut to a scene of Asuna taking a bath, which is completely unnecessary. It feels like the writers had to shoehorn in some fan service because the introduction scene was so boring and slow. Most viewers were probably already losing interest by this point, and this kind of pointless filler does nothing to advance the story or develop the characters. It just highlights how lazy and desperate the writing can be. The fact that the author thought this was a good idea says a lot about their judgment and the priorities of the show. Instead of focusing on story, character development, or world building, they inserted a scene that is uncomfortable and entirely irrelevant, which only makes the series feel more shallow and poorly handled. We first met Asuna when she was a teenager, so even though she is technically over 80 now, it still feels creepy to see her bathing. I have no idea why the author thought this was okay. It comes off as completely inappropriate and makes the scene uncomfortable instead of entertaining. Asuna talks to Kirito on the phone while taking a bath. It is laughable how her phone is just sitting right next to the water. Like she was literally waiting for Kirito to call her or something. The scene comes off as awkward and sad rather than cute or romantic. It highlights how ridiculous and poorly thought out some of the fan service moments in the show are. And the phone is not even on. When you get a call, the screen should show the caller's name, number, call length, or at least some indication that it is ringing. This little detail being completely ignored makes the scene feel even more lazy and unrealistic. It is another example of the sloppy attention to detail that runs through Sword Art Online, turning what could have been a normal moment into something painfully unconvincing. Asuna is free all day and immediately accepts the invitation to go on the quest, which is pretty dumb. Does she really not have anything better to do? It makes her character feel one-dimensional and serves only to move the plot forward without any real motivation or logic. Scenes like this make the story feel lazy and predictable, as if the characters exist only to follow the script rather than act like real people. It makes Asuna seem like a completely passive character. She just sits around and does nothing until Kirito calls her, and then suddenly she has all the time in the world to do whatever he wants. This kind of writing strips her of agency and personality, making her feel like a prop rather than a fully realized character. Instead of being interesting or independent, she exists only to react to Kirito, which is frustrating and boring to watch. Why is the arc even called Calibur? The sword is called Excalibur. It seems like they are just trying to be edgy by leaving out a few letters. This kind of lazy naming choice makes the show feel cheap and thoughtless. Instead of respecting the legend or creating something meaningful, they slap on a slightly altered name and call it a day, which is exactly the kind of sloppy, half-baked decision that runs through Sword Art Online. The opening song is sung by the Japanese voice actress of Asuna. That might be cool if you were a fan of the show, but I am not, so I genuinely could not care less. It feels like the kind of detail that only appeals to people already invested in the series, and for anyone who is critical of it, it does nothing to make the show more interesting or worthwhile. The opening is unbelievably cheesy. It keeps flashing back to scenes from earlier arcs, as if it is painfully aware that those arcs were far superior and this one is weak in comparison. Instead of standing on its own with solid storytelling, it leans entirely on nostalgia to try to carry it. It is like the show is begging the audience to remember the good parts while ignoring how poorly this arc was written. Every flashback only highlights how uninspired and bland the current storyline is. There is yet another scene of the characters just sitting and talking while eating and drinking, this time in the game. It feels like the show cannot move forward without another pointless exposition dump. Scenes like this are repetitive, boring, and make the pacing feel unbearably slow. Instead of showing action or meaningful development, the characters spend most of the time doing nothing, which is exhausting to watch. It turns out Klein is on vacation because the show claims there are no shipments at work during the New Year's season. That is completely backwards. In real life, New Year's is one of the busiest times of the year for shipping and logistics. Between holiday backlogs, returns, restocking, and year-end business deadlines, logistics workers are usually slammed, not sitting around with nothing to do. This is not a small nitpick. It is a basic reality check that the writer either did not know or did not care to think about. Details like this matter because they ground a story in something believable, and Sword Art Online consistently fails at that. In fact, Christmas and New Year's are two of the busiest delivery periods of the entire year. Most companies are working overtime to handle the holiday rush, so the idea that there would be no shipments at all is completely unrealistic. Scenes like this highlight the sloppy attention to detail of the show and make the world feel poorly researched and unbelievable. What makes it even worse is how transparent the decision feels. The excuse exists purely so Klein can be shoved into the arc, not because it makes sense in the world. The writer wanted Klein there, so he invented a flimsy justification and moved on without a second thought. At the same time, Agile is conveniently written out because he is supposedly too busy. So Klein gets a contrived vacation while Agile gets excluded entirely. And that choice looks bad no matter how you slice it. Agile is already one of the most underused characters in the series, and he also happens to be the only black character in the main cast. When the story bends over backwards to include everyone except him, it creates some very uncomfortable optics. Even if it was not intentional, it comes across as careless at best. Representation means nothing if characters are constantly sidelined or erased the moment the plot feels like it. This is a perfect example of Sword Art Online's broader problem. The writer does not plan, does not research, and does not think through implications. Characters appear or disappear based on convenience. Realism is sacrificed without hesitation, and the world never feels like a real place. Instead of feeling like a lived-in universe, it feels like a stage where excuses are hastily written so the cast can stand where the plot needs them. And the more this happens, the harder it becomes to take anything in the story seriously. Klein wants to get a blade called Kagutsuchi, but that is actually the name of a Japanese god from Japanese mythology. Why include it in a game that is supposed to be based on Norse mythology? It makes no sense and once again shows how careless the writers are with world building. Instead of respecting the setting or creating something that fits, they just throw in random names that sound cool, which makes the story feel sloppy and inconsistent. He is the god of fire, and Kirito even said the dungeon is like an oven, so I am not mistaking it for something else. The show is clearly trying to tie the blade to its mythological origin, but placing a Japanese fire god in a Norse-themed setting is completely out of place. It is another example of sloppy writing that ignores logic and consistency just to throw in flashy names or ideas. And the part where Kirito does not want to help Klein is just rude and selfish. Klein is risking his time and effort to help Kirito get Excalibur. So the least Kirito could do is return the favor. Instead, Kirito acts like he is above everyone else, which makes him come across as arrogant and unlikable. Scenes like this highlight how poorly his character is written and why he feels so inconsistent throughout the series. Sinon wants to get the shek in a bow, but that is actually a Hebrew word. Why would the show name an item like that in a game that is supposed to be based on Norse mythology? It makes no sense, and is yet another example of sloppy, careless world building. Instead of creating weapons and items that fit the setting, the writers just throw in random names from completely unrelated cultures, which makes the story feel inconsistent and poorly thought out. Lisbeth mentions that bows in the game do not have long range, which is terrible game design. Bows are supposed to be long-range weapons, and taking away that core feature makes no sense. It breaks the logic of the game world and makes the combat feel awkward and frustrating. This is another example of the show ignoring basic gaming mechanics, just to force the story in a direction that is convenient for the writers. It will never not be creepy how UI calls Kirito daddy. No matter the context, it comes across as unsettling and inappropriate. Scenes like this make the show uncomfortable to watch and highlight just how poorly some of the character interactions are handled. Apparently, nobody has reached the dungeon yet, which is completely absurd. If Excalibur is the best weapon in the game, everyone should be racing to get it. The fact that they are not makes all the players seem incompetent and the game world feel unrealistic. It is another example of lazy writing that ignores logic just to make Kirito and his friends look special. Asuna finds out that the quest is a slaughter quest, which involves killing monsters, and she is horrified. But killing monsters is a completely normal part of online games. It is literally what most quests are about. Acting shocked over something that is standard gameplay makes her reaction feel overblown and unrealistic. It is another example of the show trying to force drama in a way that does not make sense within the game world. Klein is confused because Excalibur was supposed to be located at the end of the dungeon, and now there is an NPC offering it as a kill quest reward. Klein is right to be skeptical. It makes no sense at all and perfectly reflects the sloppy writing of the show. Scenes like this highlight how inconsistent and poorly thought out the plot is, leaving viewers frustrated and unable to take the story seriously. Lisbeth restores weapons for everyone, which makes it seem like her only role in the story is to serve as a helper that the other characters can just use whenever they need their weapons repaired. Instead of being a fully developed character with her own goals or personality, she exists primarily to make the main characters' lives easier. It reduces her to a background prop and highlights how flat and underwritten many of the supporting characters are. Lisbeth suggests that Klein use magic, but he insists he is a samurai and would never be caught dead using it. That is a dumb, self-imposed restriction that makes no sense in a game where strategy and practicality should come first. Instead of doing whatever is necessary to succeed, the character arbitrarily limits himself for no real reason, which only highlights the show's sloppy and inconsistent writing. Lisbeth says that in RPGs, samurai are classed as both warriors and black magic users, which is not true. Warriors and black magic users are two completely separate classes in almost every RPG. Grouping them together like that makes no sense and shows a complete misunderstanding of basic game mechanics. It is another example of the sloppy writing that plagues Sword Art Online and makes the world feel inconsistent and poorly thought out. Silica informs Klein that when he uses a flame sword skill, he is technically using magic. Klein is surprised by this as if it is some shocking revelation. Who even cares that he is using magic? Nobody else seems to care at all, so the entire scene comes off as pointless and overdramatic. It just adds unnecessary fuss over something that has no real impact on the story or the characters. Why does the show even waste time talking about this? It rushes through all the important plot points and character moments, yet somehow finds time to linger on meaningless details like whether Klein is technically using magic. Scenes like this make the pacing feel terrible and highlight how poorly the story prioritizes what actually matters, leaving viewers frustrated and bored. Kirito says that you do not need to chant when using sword skills, so it is not technically the same as using magic. Even if it were, again, who cares? Can we stop wasting time on this pointless argument and actually move the story forward? Scenes like this drag on for no reason and make the show feel slow, tedious, and completely focused on irrelevant details. Kirito appreciates everyone helping him out on such short notice. But the way the story is written, The other characters really do not have anything to do anyway. Their help feels meaningless because they are just background props, existing only to make Kirito look good. It highlights how one-dimensional the supporting cast is, and how the story revolves entirely around making Kirito seem special. The characters are tired of running down the steps. Is there really no faster way to reach the location, like teleporting? If this were a real game, players would be frustrated and probably quit long before getting there. Scenes like this show how unrealistic and poorly thought out the game mechanics in the show are, making the world feel slow, tedious, and frustrating instead of exciting. Kirito mentions that this is a shortcut and that the normal route to Jotunheim takes 2 hours. Seriously? Who would spend 2 hours just traveling somewhere in a real game? The game design here is awful and completely unrealistic. Instead of creating a world that feels engaging and fun to explore, the show relies on arbitrary travel times that make no sense and only slow down the story. Kirito grabs Sinon by the tail and she screams. Why is this even something you can do in the game? It comes off as harassment more than anything else. The fact that the game allows players to physically grab other characters like this is uncomfortable and poorly thought out. Moments like this feel awkward and unnecessary. And they raise questions the show clearly does not want to answer about consent and basic player interaction. And the fact that Kirito thought this was funny makes it even worse. Instead of realizing how inappropriate it was, he treats it like a joke, which reflects badly on his character. Moments like this make you wonder what other behavior the show expects viewers to just accept or laugh off. It turns Kirito from an annoying lead into someone who feels uncomfortable to watch. And it adds yet another reason why his character comes across as poorly written and unlikable. Klein tells Kirito that he has balls of steel, but let us be honest, it is really just plot armor. Kirito is never in real danger because the writer would never allow him to be weak or fail in any meaningful way. Every risky moment is fake tension since you already know he will come out on top, instead of earning his victories through struggle or loss. The story bends over backward to protect him, which makes his so-called bravery feel hollow and undeserved. Klein freezing just highlights how stupid the whole idea of feeling real sensations in a game actually is. Who in their right mind wants to log into a game just to feel cold, miserable, and uncomfortable? Games are supposed to be fun, not a test of how long you can tolerate simulated suffering. If I wanted to freeze, I could just go outside and winter for free. This feature is sold as immersive, but it really just sounds annoying and pointless. No sane player wants to feel pain, exhaustion, or freezing temperatures while trying to relax and enjoy a game. It turns what should be escapism into a chore. Moments like this make the game world feel poorly thought out and reinforce how little the series understands what actually makes games enjoyable. Asuna suddenly casts a freeze resistance spell so they stop feeling cold. Why did she not do this earlier? It makes no sense to wait until everyone is already freezing and complaining. If she had this spell the whole time, she should have used it while they were on their way instead of letting the group suffer for no reason. Moments like this make the characters look incompetent and the writing feels sloppy. Problems only exist because the story wants them to, not because they make sense in the world. It is fake tension created by characters forgetting abilities they already have, which is lazy and frustrating to watch. The characters ride on Tonki to reach the dungeon, which feels completely unnecessary. If players could just fly like the game already allows in most areas, none of this would be needed. Instead, the story invents a problem just to justify riding a random monster, which comes across as forced and pointless. And once again, Tonki is not even from Norse mythology. It is just another made-up creature shoved into a setting that already has plenty of real mythological beings to draw from. The author clearly wanted to include something cute or quirky without caring whether it fit the world at all. It adds nothing meaningful and only makes the setting feel more inconsistent and poorly thought out. Lifa calls Kirito by his real name, Kazuto, even though they are inside the game. That makes no sense. In a virtual world where everyone is using avatars and screen names, it would be far more natural to call him Kirito. Using his real name breaks immersion and blurs the line between the real world and the game in a sloppy way. It feels like the show cannot even follow its own rules. If the characters are role-playing inside a game, they should act like it. Moments like this pull you out of the experience and remind you that the writing does not care about consistency or logic, only convenience. Silica says that it is not possible to tame monsters in this game, which immediately raises a huge problem. How does she have her pet dragon, Pina, then? The show contradicts itself so casually that it feels like the rules change from scene to scene depending on what the writers need at the moment.
This kind of inconsistency completely breaks the game world.
Either monster taming is possible or it is not. You cannot have it both ways. When the rules are this loose and poorly defined, nothing feels earned and nothing matters, because the story can just bend reality whenever it wants. The characters meet an NPC named who is introduced as the Queen of the Lake. But in actual Norse mythology, is one of the Norns, a powerful figure tied to fate and destiny, not some random lake ruler. Changing her role drastically strips the name of all its meaning. Why even include a mythological character if you are not going to respect the source material at all? At that point, you might as well make up a new name. Using real mythological figures while ignoring who they actually are just feels lazy and disrespectful, especially for viewers who know even the basics of Norse mythology. It feels like the writer just used mythology because it was in the public domain and he could not come up with his own ideas. Then he could not be bothered to actually do any research, so he ended up changing a bunch of things for no reason. The result is a story that is full of inaccuracies and contradictions, and shows no respect for the source material at all. Then starts dumping lore on the audience. She claims Jotunheim used to be full of green land and beautiful lakes, and that beneath it was a realm called Niflheim ruled by a king of the frost giants. According to this story, he cast Excalibur into a well, severed the roots of the world tree, and that is somehow why Jotunheim became cold and desolate. None of this is even remotely accurate to Norse mythology. This is not a small change or a creative twist. It is completely wrong. Niflheim is not ruled by some made-up frost giant king. Excalibur has nothing to do with the world tree. And Jotunheim was never some warm paradise ruined by a magic sword. The show just mashes together random names and concepts with no care for how they actually work. At this point, it is not an adaptation, it is mythology fan fiction written by someone who clearly did not bother to do basic research. This show makes me sick to my stomach as a mythology fan. It gets so much wrong that you have to wonder why they even bothered basing it on mythology at all. If you're just going to change everything, twist the rules, and invent random details, why not create your own world instead of pretending to adapt something with such a rich history? It feels careless, disrespectful, and completely frustrating to watch. The sword Calibur is also mentioned, and this just adds to the mess. Calibur is another name for Excalibur in Arthurian legend, so throwing it into a Norse-inspired game makes no sense at all. It feels like the writers are just grabbing names that sound cool without caring about consistency or meaning. Instead of creating a coherent world, they pile in random references, which only highlights how sloppy and poorly thought out the story is. And Calibur is not actually a separate sword, it is just another name for Excalibur. That means having both of them exist in the same story is completely redundant and makes no sense. The writers clearly do not care about accuracy or internal logic, and this kind of careless duplication only makes the plot feel more confusing and poorly constructed. The Frost Giants also plan to take over the surface world next, which is completely inaccurate to Norse mythology. In the original myths, the Frost Giants have their own realm and complex relationships with the gods, but there is no story about them plotting a generic conquest of the surface world. Scenes like this show how the show ignores the source material entirely and replaces rich mythology with lazy, generic villain plots. They did not even spell accepted correctly. It is shown as accepted. The animators cannot even be bothered to do basic spell checking. Small mistakes like this make the show feel sloppy and unprofessional, and they add to the overall impression that no one involved is paying attention to details. It is the kind of lazy oversight that makes viewers roll their eyes instead of being immersed in the story. Klein wants to complete the quest so they can score a spot in a popular MMO newsletter tomorrow. But if there are thousands of MMOs in this universe, why would anyone care about some random quest in a random game? It would not matter at all to people who do not play that specific MMO. The whole plot point feels forced and meaningless, as if the writers needed a reason to justify the quest, but did not think about whether it actually makes sense in the larger world. And that concludes the first episode of this arc. Literally all of it is just setup and exposition. No payoff, no action, nothing exciting. Who even thought this was a good idea? Imagine being hyped to watch this show, only to get stuck with endless talking and zero meaningful events. It is exhausting, boring, and completely fails to deliver on anything that might make the series enjoyable. Yui explains that Alfheim Online is different from other MMOs because it is based on the cardinal system from Sword Art Online and can automatically generate quests. That sounds like terrible game design. Quests should be carefully designed by humans so they make sense, have interesting challenges, and are engaging to play. If everything is just fully AI-generated, it is going to turn into sloppy, repetitive nonsense with no thought or planning behind it. It completely undermines what makes an MMO fun or immersive. No wonder the game is so poorly designed. Everything is just AI-generated with no human oversight or creativity. It is fine to use AI as a tool, but leaving everything up to AI is a terrible choice and results in sloppy, thoughtless design. Also, it is funny how this show predicted AI slop over a decade before it became an actual thing. I guess it got one thing right. And yes, I know it is ironic because I am using AI to help me make this video, but I do not consider it slop. This video is carefully written, well-researched, and structured. Unlike the lazy, thoughtless content the show churns out, it is proof that AI can be a tool for quality work if used properly. Unlike the sloppy world building in Sword Art Online. And this just makes the whole premise even more ridiculous. One quest is blatantly based on The Ring, and another is clearly riffing on Friday the 13th. Even though the show explicitly claims these quests are supposed to be drawn from legends and folklore from around the world. That makes absolutely no sense. The Ring and Friday the 13th are modern horror movies. Not ancient myths, not folklore, and not cultural legends passed down through generations. They are copyrighted pop culture stories from the late 20th century. This completely breaks the internal logic the show tries to set up. If the system is supposedly drawing from myth and folklore, then why is it pulling from Hollywood slashers and horror films instead? At that point, the rules mean nothing. It just becomes a grab bag of random references the author thought were cool, regardless of whether they fit the world, the premise, or even the explanation the show itself gives. It once again shows how little thought goes into consistency. The writer throws around words like legend and folklore to make the game sound deep and mystical, but then immediately undermines that idea by shoving in modern movie references. It is shallow reference bait, not world building. Instead of creating a coherent system or respecting the difference between mythology and pop culture, the show just mixes everything together and hopes the audience does not notice or does not care. And on top of all that, those movies are not even in the public domain. The Ring and Friday the 13th are copyrighted works. So how exactly is this system allowed to take those stories and generate quests based on them inside the game? From a legal and logical standpoint, that is straight up copyright infringement. The show already established that these quests are supposedly pulled from folklore and legends, which are typically in the public domain. That explanation at least makes sense on paper. But the moment you bring in modern horror movies, the entire justification collapses. A real MMO could not legally do this. Developers cannot just lift the premise, imagery, and structure of copyrighted films and turn them into in-game quests without licensing them. That would be a lawsuit waiting to happen. Once again, this highlights how little the writer understands or cares about the implications of what he is writing. He wants the aesthetic and the reference without thinking through the consequences. The cardinal system is treated like a magical excuse that can bypass reality, law, and common sense whenever the plot needs it to. Instead of building a believable virtual world, the story relies on hand-waving and expects the audience not to think about it for more than 2 seconds. It also undercuts the supposed sophistication of the system. If it can casually plagiarize copyrighted movies, then it is not some elegant myth-generating engine. It is just a glorified content theft machine. And once you notice that, it becomes impossible to take any of the world building seriously. You know how people today are complaining about artificial intelligence scraping artists? Writers and filmmakers work without credit or payment? Sword Art Online straight up admits to doing exactly that and then has the audacity to present it as a cool futuristic feature. The Cardinal system casually generates quests by copying existing stories, movies, and concepts wholesale, and the show never treats this as a problem. There is no ethical discussion, no pushback, no consequences. It is framed as impressive innovation instead of blatant theft. That is honestly embarrassing. The series accidentally predicts one of the biggest modern creative controversies and then completely misses the point. Instead of questioning whether this system is exploitative or lazy, the show celebrates it. It is not clever world building. It is the writer admitting that originality does not matter as long as you remix recognizable material and hope the audience claps when they recognize the reference. What makes it worse is that the show insists these quests are based on folklore and legend, yet openly pulls from modern copyrighted horror films and pop culture. That is not mythology. That is not folklore. That is just plagiarism dressed up as game design. The irony is painful. Sword Art Online criticizes nothing, understands nothing, and unintentionally exposes how shallow its own creativity really is. You could say that I am in no position to criticize Sword Art Online for this, since I am using artificial intelligence to help make this video as well. On the surface, that sounds like a fair accusation, but the comparison completely falls apart the moment you think about how the technology is actually being used. I am not using artificial intelligence to straight up plagiarize or steal other work and then pass it off as my own. I am not copying existing stories, movies, or myths wholesale and pretending I created them. I am using artificial intelligence as a tool to speed up the boring, monotonous, and tedious parts of video creation so I can focus more on the writing, the research, and the actual critique. The ideas, the arguments, and the structure still all come from me. That is how artificial intelligence should be used. It should assist creativity, not replace it. It should improve the workflow, not excuse laziness and theft. Sword Art Online presents a system that mindlessly regurgitates existing material and calls it innovation. I am using a tool to refine and present original criticism. There's a massive difference between using technology to enhance your work and using it as a shortcut to steal other work and call it creativity. So if you are going to criticize me for using artificial intelligence, do not bother, especially if you are a Sword Art Online fan. You cannot support a show that openly glorifies artificial intelligence copying, remixing, and repackaging other people's work, and then turn around and complain about me using it as a tool. That is pure hypocrisy and double standards. Sword Art Online presents artificial intelligence as something that generates entire quests by ripping from existing myths, stories, and even modern media, and it treats that as a feature instead of a problem. Meanwhile, I am using artificial intelligence ethically, as an assistant, not a replacement for creativity or research. I am not stealing stories. I am not claiming ownership over other people's work. I am using technology to help communicate my own ideas more efficiently. If you are fine with Sword Art Online doing it, then you have no grounds to attack me for it. And if you are not fine with it, then congratulations, you finally agree with one of my criticisms. Either way, complaining about my use of artificial intelligence while defending this show makes no sense. UA has a feeling this quest is AI generated and will end the same way the myth does. But that makes no sense, because this quest is not based on any real myths. Excalibur is not even part of Norse mythology. So claiming the quest follows the myth is completely meaningless. It is just another example of the show throwing together random names and ideas without caring about accuracy or logic, making the story feel sloppy and incoherent. Wee says that this quest will end in a final war even called Ragnarok. This is so wrong it is hard to know where to start. Ragnarok in Norse mythology is a specific series of events involving gods, giants, and the fate of the world, not some random game finale with made-up quests. The show completely misuses the concept, turning a rich and meaningful myth into a generic plot device. It is yet another example of sloppy writing that shows no respect for the source material. Yu mentions that below Niflheim is a fiery realm called Muspelheim where the fire giants live. But in Norse mythology, Muspelheim is not located below Niflheim at all. The two realms exist separately, and are not arranged in a vertical hierarchy like the show suggests. This is another example of the series ignoring the actual mythology and creating a setting that is inconsistent and completely inaccurate. Lifa thinks it is a mistake because no sane game would destroy its own maps, but UA insists that the Cardinal system has the authority to destroy maps if it wants. What even is this game design? Players should not be able to have entire areas of the game wiped out like this. It makes no sense, breaks immersion, and shows that the writers have no understanding of how a functional or enjoyable MMO should work. Sinon wonders if the game can just be rolled back or restored if everything is deleted, but UI says that only player data is saved, field data is not. This is so dumb it hurts. Everything in the game world should be included in the backup files. It makes no sense to save only the players and lose the entire environment, breaking the logic of how a game like this should function. Moments like this show just how poorly thought out the game mechanics are in the story. It is clear the writer has no idea how games work. From inconsistent mechanics to illogical rules and nonsensical design choices, the story constantly breaks the basic logic of an MMO. It is frustrating to watch because it feels like nothing in the game world operates in a way that even remotely makes sense, highlighting just how little the author understands actual gameplay. The characters fight two monsters that look like minotaurs, with the head of a bull and a humanoid body. But that is straight out of Greek mythology, and in the original myths, there is only one minotaur. Turning it into a generic enemy type completely ignores its original significance and shows how the show mashes together mythology without any care for accuracy or meaning. It turns a unique mythological figure into a bland, repetitive monster. It makes no sense to include Greek mythology monsters in a game that is supposed to be based on Norse mythology. Norse myth already has a rich lineup of gods, giants, beasts, and legends to pull from, so there is no excuse to borrow creatures from a completely different culture. Mixing mythologies like this does not feel creative or clever, it just feels lazy and careless. It comes across like the author either did not do any research or did not care enough to stay consistent, which completely undercuts the setting and makes the world feel fake and poorly thought out. The characters finally attack all together and almost manage to defeat the monster. But why did they wait until now to try this? It seems like something they should have done at the very start. They do not have time to waste and need to complete the quest as quickly as possible. Yet the story drags out the fight for no reason. Moments like this make the characters look incompetent and the pacing feel unnecessarily slow. This entire fight scene is so boring and pointless. Unlike Sword Art Online, players do not die in real life if they die here, so there are literally no stakes. If they fail, they just respawn and try again, which makes the whole battle feel meaningless. Without real consequences, there is no tension, no excitement, and no reason to care about what happens, turning what should be an intense moment into a dull waste of time. Kirito uses Skill Connect to wield one-handed sword skills in each hand, alternating between them to kind of dual wield like he did back in Sword Art Online. How is he the only one who thought of this? The writer clearly makes Kirito look genius by rendering all the other players completely incompetent. It is not clever strategy, it is just lazy writing that elevates Kirito at the expense of everyone else, making the world feel unbalanced and unrealistic. And why make Kirito dual wield again? This is a completely new game, so it would make much more sense to see him using new abilities or strategies instead of repeating the same old trick. Rehashing his old skills makes him predictable and boring, and it feels like the writer is relying on nostalgia rather than actually developing his character or the game mechanics in an interesting way. They only have about an hour left to complete the quest. If that is the case, then they should not be standing around and talking endlessly about irrelevant stuff. Every minute counts, yet the characters waste time with pointless conversations, making the story drag and undermining any sense of urgency. It highlights how poorly the pacing is handled and how the writing prioritizes filler over meaningful action. Sword Art Online has always had pacing problems, and this arc is no different. The writer clearly has not learned anything. It is embarrassing to watch how the same mistakes keep repeating: slow, meandering scenes, endless exposition, and pointless filler, making the series feel stagnant and frustrating for viewers who actually want a coherent, engaging story. The characters fight some random centipede-looking monster that is not even from Norse mythology. There are so many fascinating creatures from actual Norse myths that the writer could have included, yet they chose to make up something completely meaningless. It feels lazy and pointless, showing that the story has no respect for the source material and is just tossing in random elements for no reason. The characters see a random female NPC and Klein is instantly smitten. It is hilarious how desperate he comes across. Anytime he sees a woman, he immediately loses all sense of composure. Moments like this make his character feel one-dimensional and ridiculous, turning what should be a serious quest into a sideshow of predictable, cringeworthy behavior. The female NPC is trapped and begs to be freed, Everyone except Klein immediately recognizes it might be a trap, and knowing they do not have time to waste, they run off. But Klein cannot turn his back on someone in need, even if he knows it could ruin the quest. This is the dumbest logic ever. It makes no sense for a supposedly experienced player to risk everything for a random NPC. And it feels like the story is forcing drama instead of letting the characters act realistically. It just makes Klein look dumb. If this were real life, helping a random woman in need might seem noble, but this is a video game. She is just an NPC, and risking the quest or the team for her makes no sense. The writing tries to make him look heroic, but it only highlights how foolish and illogical his actions are in the context of the game. Klein is not even a real samurai, he is just role-playing as one. It makes no sense why he cares so much about some strict moral code or honor system. His obsession with samurai ethics feels forced and unnecessary, especially in a game where rules like that have no real consequences. It only makes this character seem ridiculous and out of touch with the world he is actually in. The female NPC hugs Klein and he immediately blushes. It is hilarious how predictable and easily flustered he is. Every time a woman shows him the slightest attention, he completely loses composure, turning what could be a small moment into an over-the-top ridiculous display. It makes him look more like a cartoonish fanboy than a competent player. Klein is the oldest person in the group, yet his maturity level is somehow the lowest. You would expect him to act like the adult in the room, or at least show some basic self-awareness. But instead he behaves like an overgrown teenager who never learned how to read the situation. He constantly makes bad jokes, drools over every female character he sees, and embarrasses himself at every possible opportunity. Age is supposed to come with some level of wisdom or restraint, but Klein has neither. Being older only makes his behavior look worse, not endearing, and it turns him into comic relief that is more pathetic than funny. The female NPC is named Freya. In Norse mythology, she is the goddess of love, beauty, fertility, and war, a powerful and respected figure among the gods. She is far more than just a damsel in need or a random quest character. Her role carries significant meaning and influence in the myths. Turning her into a generic NPC for a video game quest completely undermines her importance and shows how little the story respects the original mythology. And her character design is so boring, bland, and generic. If you're going to include a literal goddess in your story, she should actually look like one. Freya deserves a striking, memorable design that reflects her power and status, not some forgettable NPC appearance that makes her blend into the background. The way she is presented completely fails to capture the majesty and significance of her mythological character. Freya joining the party makes no sense at all from a game design perspective. If NPCs can just join player parties, then what is stopping players from recruiting powerful NPCs to do all the work for them? It completely breaks balance and removes any challenge, since the game itself is now helping you win. At that point, you are not playing a game anymore. You are just being escorted through content by overpowered characters, which makes the entire quest feel pointless and poorly designed. Before entering the boss room, Freya boosts everyone beyond their max HP. This just makes her seem completely overpowered with these random abilities. Silica even admits she did not know a spell could do that. It feels unearned and arbitrary, highlighting how the story gives characters convenient powers whenever the plot needs them instead of maintaining consistent rules or logic. It turns out Freya was supposedly meant to marry the frost giant king Thrym in actual Norse mythology. Thrym did want to marry her in exchange for returning Thor's hammer, Mjolnir. So for once, the story is somewhat accurate. It is a rare moment where the writers actually reference a real myth, even if the context around it is still twisted for the plot. Leafa knows the story, but cannot remember the part about Mjolnir. It seems like the writer just wanted to keep that detail a secret until later, which ends up making Leafa seem stupid. That is literally the whole point of the myth, so her forgetting it is ridiculous and only highlights how poorly the story handles its characters and their knowledge. We finally get to the final boss fight, and it is completely underwhelming. What should be an epic, tense clash turns out to be a slog. We know the characters are not in any real danger, they will not die. Even if they fail, they just respawn and try again, which completely removes any sense of stakes or excitement. A moment that should feel intense and thrilling ends up feeling flat and meaningless. The boss battle makes no sense at all. The characters are just randomly attacking from every angle with no strategy or planning. It feels chaotic and poorly thought out, turning what should be an intense, tactical fight into a messy, directionless scene. There is no tension, no clever maneuvers, just a confusing jumble of attacks that accomplishes nothing meaningful. Freya tells Kirito that they cannot defeat the Frost Giant King and that they should look for her treasure instead, which is Mjolnir. This seems like something she should have mentioned before the fight even began. If they knew this from the start, they could have skipped the whole battle entirely. The timing makes no sense and feels like the writers are artificially dragging out the story for no reason. Kirito uses his lightning skill to find the hammer. But why does he even have a skill like this? It seems like the writer just wanted an excuse to have Kirito use lightning because Thor is involved. The ability feels completely arbitrary and forced, highlighting how the story shoehorns powers and mechanics into the plot without any logical reasoning. Kirito finds the hammer and tosses it to Freya. In Norse mythology, only Thor and his kin can wield Mjolnir, not even Odin can lift it. By letting Kirito pick it up, the show is essentially making him seem like a god. It completely ignores the rules of the myth and unnecessarily elevates Kirito, turning him into an overpowered, unrealistic character at the expense of the story's logic. The design for Mjolnir is also boring and bland, just like everything else in the show. A weapon this iconic deserves to look powerful, legendary, and awe-inspiring. But instead, it looks forgettable and uninspired. It perfectly reflects the lazy, uninspired approach the series takes to its source material. Freya turns into Thor in the show. In the original myth, it is actually Thor who disguises himself as Freya in bridal drag. Freya never transforms into Thor. This change completely twists the source material and shows how little respect the story has for the original myths, turning a clever tale into something nonsensical. Kirito and Klein are surprised that Freya is a dude, and they should be, because in Norse mythology, Freya is not a man. She is her own character, a powerful goddess, and never transforms into Thor. The show's version completely ignores her identity in the original myth, twisting the story into something confusing and disrespectful to the source material. And of course, it turns out they actually did need to save the female NPC after all. So what was the alternative here? What if Klein was not such a desperate simp who drops everything the moment an NPC woman bats her eyelashes at him? Would the quest have just failed outright? Would the players have been permanently locked out of completion? Because they did not stop to rescue a random NPC they were explicitly told was a waste of time. If the answer is yes, then that is absolutely terrible game design. A quest should never hinge on an untelegraphed, easily missable moral choice that punishes players for doing the logical thing. The party had a strict time limit, a clear objective, and every reason to ignore a suspicious side interaction. In any real MMO, skipping an optional NPC rescue would either lead to an alternate solution or a different ending, not a hard fail state with no warning. This means the game either expects players to read the author's mind, or assumes everyone will act like Klein and derail the mission for no good reason. That is not clever storytelling. That is a trap disguised as player choice. It removes agency and replaces it with a gotcha moment that only exists to justify the plot after the fact. It also retroactively turns Klein's behavior from annoying but ignorable into something the story rewards. His impulsive, irrational decision is validated, not because it was smart or heroic, but because the writer needed it to be correct. That is not character growth. That is the plot bending itself to excuse bad behavior. So either the quest was impossible without Thor, meaning players are forced into one exact path with zero flexibility, or the show just made it up as it went along. Either way, it exposes how shallow the game mechanics really are. A supposed MMO where success depends on one specific NPC rescue with no indication or backup plan is not immersive. It is just badly written and even worse designed. It was far too convenient how everything works out perfectly in the end, and every decision the characters make somehow ends up justified. The show is terrified of taking any risks. No failures, no real consequences, no mistakes. That is not good storytelling. Real people are flawed, make poor choices, and often face the messy results of their actions. Making the characters unrealistically perfect just makes the story boring, and the predictable happy ending kills any tension or suspense. Even the most powerful characters like Superman have weaknesses and occasionally make the wrong decisions. Not here. In this arc, everything always works out perfectly. There are no real consequences, no mistakes, no struggle, just an endlessly convenient plot. It is the kind of predictable, simplistic storytelling that feels like it was written by a 5-year-old. It would have made far more sense if one of the characters actually knew the original mythology behind the quest and explained that saving the NPC was necessary. That way, the actions would feel logical and earned, rather than just a convenient plot device shoehorned in to force the story forward. Instead, the show treats it as if Klein's desperate urge to help is the only reason they succeed, which makes the whole sequence feel contrived and ridiculous. Lifa already claimed she knew the story, yet conveniently could not remember the part about the hammer. If that were truly the case, she should have spoken up and explained who the NPC was and what needed to be done. Instead, her selective memory serves only to create artificial tension and make the plot feel sloppy and contrived. It is just bad writing overall. The characters are made to act dumb or oblivious whenever the plot demands it, sacrificing any sense of consistency or intelligence just to manufacture tension or drama. It feels less like a story and more like the author forcing events to happen. The character design for Thor in this show is also bland and boring. For such an iconic god, he should look powerful, commanding, and memorable, but instead he comes across as forgettable and uninspired. It perfectly matches the show's overall lazy approach to its characters and world building. The characters attack Thrym with their sword skills, even though many of them do not actually use swords. This makes the name sword skills feel completely inaccurate and meaningless in this context. It is just another example of sloppy writing, where terms and abilities are forced into scenes without any real logic or consistency. Thor is the one who defeats Thrym in the end. In the original mythology, it was Thor who killed him after reclaiming Mjolnir, so at least this part is accurate. I expected the writer to make Kirito the one who defeated Thrym, but for once, he actually followed the original story instead of unnecessarily giving the glory to the overpowered main character. Too bad this small bit of accuracy does not make the show any better after the endless stream of inaccuracies. One correct moment cannot fix a series that constantly twists myths, ignores logic, and treats its source material with complete disrespect. The writer is probably banking on the fact that most people do not know the original mythology, so they will not care. Well, I am not most people, and I do care. Seeing such blatant errors and disrespect for the source material is frustrating and makes the show almost impossible to enjoy for anyone who actually knows the myths. Loki was part of the original mythology as well, yet he is nowhere to be found in this anime. That omission alone says a lot. Loki is one of the most important figures in Norse mythology, deeply tied to the gods, the giants, and even Ragnarok itself. Leaving him out makes the world feel incomplete and shallow. It feels like the writer either did not care enough to include him or realized that handling a complex character like Loki would require real effort and understanding. Instead of engaging with the mythology in a meaningful way, the story cherry-picks names and concepts while ignoring core figures that actually matter. As a reward, Thor gives Klein a smaller version of Mjolnir. In Norse mythology, there is only one hammer. Mjolnir is unique and cannot be replicated. Giving Klein his own version completely undermines the significance of the original weapon and once again shows how the story ignores the rules of the myths it claims to draw from. Klein cannot even use the hammer since he does not have the skills for it, but there is no reason for him to be sad. He can just sell the weapon to another player who has the proper skills and actually wants it. It should be worth a lot, making it more of a valuable item than a personal reward, which would make far more sense in a game setting. If all the quests are AI-generated and unique, is there really only one Mjolnir for a player to obtain in the entire game? If so, that is completely unfair to all the other players who did not get this quest. In a properly designed game, every item should be obtainable by someone, and limiting it to a single player makes no sense and only highlights sloppy, unrealistic game mechanics. The quest is not over yet since Excalibur has not been removed. How did the characters forget such an important part of the quest? Instead of standing around and prematurely celebrating, they should be rushing to remove Excalibur before time runs out. The way they act makes no sense and completely undermines any sense of urgency the quest should have. Kirito pulls Excalibur out of the plinth and the imagery mirrors Arthur pulling the sword in Arthurian legend. Again, this is from a completely different mythology, not Norse mythology, so it makes no sense to include it here. It feels completely out of place and shows how carelessly the story mixes myths without any respect for their origins. And Kirito just yanking Excalibur out with brute force completely goes against the original legend. In Arthurian mythology, the sword is not something you can just lift if you are strong. Only someone truly worthy, Arthur himself, can pull it from the stone or the plinth. Excalibur is meant to be a symbol of virtue, destiny, and rightful leadership, not a weightlifting challenge. Turning it into a test of raw strength completely undermines its meaning and makes the story feel cheap and lazy. It just goes to show that the author does not understand the story at all. He seems to think that strength is all that matters. And since Kirito is the most overpowered character, he can just brute force his way through anything. The nuance, symbolism, and meaning behind Excalibur are completely ignored, reducing a legendary artifact to nothing more than a prop for Kirito to look cool with. It is downright insulting to fans of the original legend. Anyone who grew up reading these stories or cares about good storytelling will feel disrespected. The show tramples over the source material, turning rich, meaningful tales into shallow, meaningless spectacle. The moral of the story is not that strength is the only thing that matters. Excalibur is meant to be a symbol of virtue, honor, and worthiness, showing that a true hero is defined by character, not raw power. Sword Art Online completely fails to understand this. By having Kirito pull Excalibur out with brute force, the show reduces a profound symbol of moral integrity to just another flashy action moment. It treats the legendary sword like a generic power-up in a video game instead of respecting the lessons of the original myth. This disregard for the meaning of the story highlights the lack of understanding and care from the writer, turning a rich, moral-driven legend into shallow spectacle. What lessons are people even supposed to take away from Sword Art Online? That the overpowered protagonist always wins and gets exactly what he wants, no matter what? That is a terrible lesson. It completely undermines any sense of struggle, growth, or meaningful conflict, and it sets a poor example for storytelling. Instead of showing teamwork, strategy, or clever thinking, the show just reinforces the idea that being strong or lucky is all that matters. There is absolutely no reason to include Excalibur if you are not going to respect the original legend. If it were some random fantasy sword the author invented, fine, no problem. But Excalibur is a sword from a real legend, and twisting its story into whatever the show wants is just lazy and disrespectful to the source material. And the part where the other characters have to cheer Kirito on is just painfully cringe. The show completely reduces them to nothing more than cheerleaders for the hero. They have no agency, no real purpose, and exist solely to make Kirito look cooler. Instead of being fully fleshed out characters, they are props in his story, which is insulting to the audience and makes the entire scene feel forced and artificial. It is also far too convenient how the characters completed the dungeon on their very first try. Nobody died, and they finished the quest right on time. Everything went perfectly according to plan. But that is not how real games work. In reality, even the best players often need multiple attempts to clear a dungeon. They die, they retry, and they learn from their mistakes. If it were really this easy, there would be no sense of challenge, no tension, and no satisfaction in completing it. Sword Art Online completely ignores the reality of gameplay and turns what should be an exciting, tense experience into a boring walk in the park. And the reward for this quest is the best and most powerful weapon in the entire game. It should be far more difficult to obtain. In any well-designed game, the top-tier items require serious commitment, skill, and time to earn. They are not something players can just get on their very first try. Sword Art Online completely ignores this principle, making the ultimate weapon feel cheap and meaningless. It is painfully obvious that the writer does not play MOs. He acts like obtaining the best items and completing the hardest dungeons is a walk in the park. Any real MMO player knows how much time, strategy, and repeated attempts it actually takes. This disconnect makes the story feel completely unrealistic and insulting to anyone who has played games seriously. Klein tries to save the day but fails miserably. The show constantly treats him with no respect, making him look like a bumbling idiot rather than a competent character. It is frustrating to watch a character who should contribute meaningfully be reduced to comic relief or incompetence for the sake of the main character's glory. The characters make it just in time. Of course they do. Did anyone really have any doubts? I am pretty sure everyone over the age of 3 knew they would be successful in the end. The show makes even the most tense moments completely predictable, removing any real suspense or excitement. The characters are saved by Tonki, and Kirito has to throw Excalibur away, since it is too heavy and he cannot claim it yet because the quest is not technically over. This is a dumb decision. It makes no sense to just toss the best weapon in the entire game. Kirito should have held onto it. There's no logical reason to discard something so valuable, and this choice only highlights the sloppy and inconsistent writing. Sinon uses one of her arrows to retrieve Excalibur. So what was the point of Kirito throwing it away just for Sinon to get it back a few seconds later? The show is clearly trying to make it seem like Kirito had to make a tough, heroic decision and give up something powerful, but in the end that tension is completely meaningless. It is pointless, and just another example of the story pretending to have stakes it never actually follows through on. Sinon gives Kirito Excalibur on the condition that every time he draws the sword, he has to think about her. This angered the other girls who are all supposedly in love with Kirito as well. It is clearly meant to be a comedic scene, but it just comes off as pathetic. Kirito is portrayed as a loser with no charm or riz, and yet the story still insists that all the girls fall for him for no reason. It is absurd and highlights how poorly written his character is. And for all the idiots who try to claim that Sword Art Online is not a harem show, this scene completely debunks that. If it were not a harem, the other girls would have no reason to be angry about what Sinon said to Kirito. The fact that they are jealous proves exactly what kind of story this is. Kirito kicks Klein in the face. Why is this even possible in the game? Players should not be able to randomly attack each other, unless they are in a designated PvP zone. Allowing this opens the door for abuse, and makes the game world feel poorly designed and chaotic, instead of fair or realistic. Kirito agrees to think about Sinon every time he draws Excalibur and thanks her. I highly doubt that is actually going to happen. It is also hilarious and a little pathetic how Asuna just stands by, letting her man think about other girls without any reaction. The scene makes all the supposed romance and relationships in the show feel ridiculous. If Sinon was smart, she could have kept the sword and sold it. It would definitely be worth a huge amount of money since it is the best weapon in the entire game, and it is one of a kind instead of just giving it to Kirito for free. Kirito did not deserve or earn it since Sinon was the one who retrieved the sword. The show just wants to make him seem worthy simply for existing, which is ridiculous and highlights how poorly his character is written. The entire dungeon collapses, and the players were only able to complete one quest in it. It makes no sense for the developers to design such a huge dungeon and then immediately destroy it after a single quest for just one group of players. That would never happen in a real game. Building a dungeon of this scale takes massive amounts of time, effort, and money, and destroying it after one use is completely unrealistic. And Kirito is holding Excalibur just fine, even though he has not technically claimed it yet. It makes no sense why he had to toss it away earlier, making the entire tough decision moment completely pointless and inconsistent. Jotunheim becomes lush and warm again, but this never happens in actual Norse mythology. The change completely ignores the original myths and further highlights how the show twists source material without any respect for the story it claims to adapt. The quest is officially completed, and Ur's sisters Vergandi and Skuld come to thank the players as well. In Norse mythology, they are the trio of goddesses known as the Norns, not random NPCs. There is also no mention of them being sisters in the myths. So this portrayal is completely inaccurate and shows how loosely the show treats its source material. The sisters leave and Klein begs for Skuld's number, which makes him look like a desperate fool once again. Asking an NPC in a video game for her phone number is beyond pathetic and just highlights how ridiculous his character is written. Lisbeth says that she respects Klein, which is laughable. Why would anyone respect a desperate loser like Klein? It makes her comment feel completely unearned and highlights how poorly the show handles character dynamics. We cut to the next scene, which takes place in the real world. Kirito has developed a program to turn real-time footage of the real world into mock 3D images so Yui can see them in the digital world, making it feel like she is flying around the room. How is Kirito even able to do this? It makes no sense that a single player could create something so advanced, highlighting yet again how the show inflates his abilities for no reason. In real life, there are probably AI tools someone could use to do this, but the show never mentions any of that. Instead, it is all about the genius programming of Kirito, making him seem impossibly talented and further exaggerating how overpowered and unrealistic his character is. It is stated that Kirito is taking a mechatronics class, but that still does not explain how he can do something like this right off the bat. Learning a skill that advanced takes time, practice, and experience. Kirito should not be able to instantly create such a complex program, yet the show treats it as if it is no big deal. The author clearly seems desperate to turn Kirito into the center of the entire universe, not just Sword Art Online, but everything that comes after it. It feels like he wants Kirito to be retroactively framed as the genius who invented the very technology used in Axel World, as if that series could not stand on its own without being tied back to him. This kind of forced legacy building is lazy and self-indulgent. Instead of creating a new character who actually earns their place in the future, the author would rather prop up Kirito even more and pretend he is some once-in-a-generation visionary. What makes this worse is that Kirito has never shown the depth, struggle, or growth that would justify such an important role in the timeline. He is handed skills, solutions, and praise at every turn, so turning him into the father of future technology feels completely unearned. It cheapens Axel World by reducing it to a spin-off of a power fantasy character, and it cheapens Sword Art Online by exposing how hard the author is trying to make Kirito seem important. Instead of letting new ideas breathe, everything has to orbit around the same bland protagonist, and that just shows a lack of confidence in the writing. And how does Kirito even have the time to take a class while still being the best player in the game? Being the top player in an MMO takes an insane amount of grinding, practice, and constant playtime. You do not just log in casually and stay ahead of everyone else who is putting in hours every single day. The show wants us to believe he can juggle school, advanced classes, and still dominate the game with zero effort, which is completely unrealistic. This once again feeds into the same problem with his character. Kirito never has to make real choices or sacrifices. Other players would have to decide between real-life responsibilities and staying competitive in a game, but Kirito magically does both with no consequences. It makes his achievements feel hollow because they are not earned. The writer bends time and logic just to keep him on top. And that makes the entire idea of him being the best player feel fake and undeserved. The characters hold a party and celebrate. Yet another cafe scene in an anime already full of them. It is like the writer cannot think of any other settings and just keeps recycling the same boring locations over and over again. It is also funny how they are celebrating in the cafe owned by Ajol, and he was not even part of the story. It comes off as disrespectful. Like the show is just using his cafe as a convenient backdrop without giving him any real purpose. It is the end-of-year party for 2025. It is wild to think that this anime was made over a decade ago, and now real-world time has finally caught up to its setting. What used to feel like a futuristic or far-off timeline now feels like the present, which makes the series' outdated ideas and technology even more obvious. The show is trying to stay relevant, but instead it highlights just how out of touch some of its concepts were from the start. Sinon wonders why the sword is called Excalibur in the game, since in all the fantasy books and comics she has read about King Arthur, Calibur is the usual name. That makes no sense. Excalibur is the more popular and well-known name for the sword, so choosing otherwise only confuses the audience. The real question is why there's even a sword like this in the game to begin with. Arthurian legends and Norse mythology are two completely separate things, so putting Excalibur in a Norse-themed game makes no sense at all. Norse mythology is full of legendary swords. Each one is more than a weapon. Each one is a story. Graham, also called Balmung, was forged by the master smith Regan. Sigurd used it to slay the dragon Fafnir. The sword was so sharp it could cut through stone like paper. It carried power and magic beyond imagination. Then there is Tyrfing, a sword made by dwarves cursed from the start. Every time it was drawn, it demanded a life. It brought disaster to its wielder, no matter what. Hrodi came from Fafnir's horde. It was beautiful, shining, and deadly. It showed that glory and danger always walk together. Dainslife never missed. Once drawn, it had to strike. Death followed it wherever it went. Mistiltein, the mistletoe sword, is tied to the death of Baldur. It reminds us that some weapons carry fate itself. These swords are more than steel. They are magic, curse, and legend. They are unforgettable. They are Norse mythology brought to life. With so many awesome swords already available in Norse mythology, it makes absolutely no sense to drag in one from Arthurian legend. It is like writing a story about Greek mythology and then deciding to throw in gods from other pantheons for no reason. Why bother inventing a pointless crossover when the source material is already packed with epic choices? It just shows laziness and a lack of respect for the mythology you are supposedly adapting. It would make a lot more sense if the sword in this arc was Graham. In Norse mythology, Graham was thrust into a tree, and only the hero Sigmund could pull it out, just like Arthur was the only one who could pull Excalibur. Too bad the author already used Graham in the fairy dance arc as Eugene's sword. If the writer had actually planned things out instead of making stuff up on the fly, using Graham as the central plot device in the Calibur arc would have been far better and more consistent. This is exactly why planning is so important. You cannot just wing a story and expect it to make sense. If you're making things up as you go along, your writing will be sloppy, inconsistent, and painfully obvious. Good writers think ahead, plot their arcs, and respect the source material. Just improvising like this is amateur hour, and it shows in every ridiculous twist and dumb decision. The author clearly has zero understanding of Norse mythology. It is painfully obvious he did not bother to do even the tiniest bit of research. If he wanted to make up his own fantasy world with his own weapons, fine, I would not complain. But to take an existing mythology, butcher it, mix it up with unrelated legends, and call it a story is lazy, arrogant, and insulting to anyone who actually cares about the source material. Getting so many basic facts wrong is unforgivable, and it makes the whole arc feel like a sloppy, careless mess. There are plenty of sources available. The author could have easily looked up information online about Norse mythology. Yet, based on this arc, it seems like he did not even skim the Wikipedia pages. That level of laziness is downright embarrassing. The author clearly just wants to make a quick buck. He does not actually care about the quality of his work, the consistency of the story, or even respecting the source material. It is obvious that he is just throwing together random ideas and hoping people will buy it. The sad part is that viewers are dumb enough to fall for it, praising this dumpster fire as if it were deep or well written. The plot makes no sense. The characters are bland, and the mythology is butchered beyond recognition, yet some people treat it like it is a masterpiece. It is laughable and kind of pathetic that this low-effort content is considered good by anyone. This arc is a prime example of how popularity does not equal quality, and how fans will defend mediocrity just because of nostalgia or a familiar name. This is just pure slop. When people complain about eye slop, all I have to do is point them towards Sword Art Online, because this is far worse. The writing is sloppy, the story is incoherent, and the characters are completely uninteresting. I have seen plenty of AI-generated content that is far more coherent, creative, and enjoyable than this garbage. It is embarrassing how much effort went into making it look like a proper story when in reality it is a chaotic mess. This arc is a perfect example of style over substance, and it fails on every single level. When AI can generate better content than you can as a professional author, there is something seriously wrong. It shows a complete lack of skill, effort, or attention to detail. If a machine can produce a more coherent, engaging, and entertaining story than a human who gets paid to do this for a living, then you have failed at your job. It is embarrassing and unacceptable. Shame on the people who keep enabling the author to churn out more garbage. The world does not need more of that. What we need are good stories, carefully crafted, engaging, and worth reading or watching. Feeding awfulness only lowers the bar for the whole genre and wastes everyone's time. Honestly, it would make far more sense for the author to base his story on Japanese mythology since he is Japanese. You do not need to be Norse to write a story about Norse mythology, but if you are not, the very least you should do is research it properly to make sure it is accurate and respects the traditions. Skipping that step and butchering the myths just shows laziness and arrogance. If he refuses to do the work, he should just stick to his own culture instead of embarrassing himself and insulting fans of the mythology. Fans of this show are clearly not fans of mythology. If they actually cared about myths, they would see how much this dumpster fire mangles the source material and walk away immediately. Liking this show is basically endorsing sloppy writing and disrespect for centuries-old stories. Shoguha did not think that Sinon was the type of person to read fantasy books. But she actually seems exactly like the quiet and nerdy girl who would go to the library and spend hours reading them. It fits her character far better than the assumption of Shoguha. Sinon mentions that the word Calibur is cool, because it refers to the diameter of a gun barrel and is also used to describe a person's character. So is that why the arc is called Calibur, even though the spelling is different? It feels like a weak attempt to justify the title and only adds to the confusion. Lisbeth mentions that whoever owns Excalibur must be an exceptional person, and since Kirito owns it, he must be exceptional. It is just another lazy attempt by the show to make Kirito seem cool without him actually earning it. Kirito pays for the entire dinner, which is completely dumb and makes no sense. The other characters basically guilt him into it, so it does not feel like a meaningful gesture at all. It is not something he chose to do out of generosity or kindness. He is just bending to the group's pressure. The whole scene feels forced and pointless and highlights how poorly the writers handle character motivation and interaction. Overall, this arc is just dumb and completely inconsequential. It adds nothing meaningful to the story, feels like filler, and exists only to stretch out the series without giving the audience anything exciting or memorable. Every scene drags, the plot makes little sense, and the characters are mostly wasting time with pointless dialogue. I am genuinely confused why the author decided to base a story on mythology and then get almost everything wrong. It makes you wonder if they even did any research, or if they just thought they could throw names and concepts together without caring about accuracy. The show does not appeal to actual gamers at all. The game mechanics are a mess, with arbitrary rules and nonsensical restrictions that make no sense in a real MMO. Players are limited in ways that feel completely unfair. Quests are poorly designed and items are handled in ways that break logic. Any gamer watching would be frustrated by how the system is set up, and it makes the entire in-game world feel amateurish and unconvincing. Instead of showing a fun, challenging virtual world, the series turns it into a playground for lazy storytelling and forced drama. The characters are completely bland and boring. They have no depth, no interesting motivations, and their personalities are one note at best. Every interaction feels forced or predictable, and you never get the sense that any of them could surprise you. It is exhausting to watch a cast that seems like it was designed to just fill space rather than actually be engaging. I have no idea how anyone can genuinely like this show. It is full of bad writing, boring characters, and sloppy world building. There are countless better alternatives out there with well-developed stories, engaging characters, and worlds that actually make sense. Choosing this show over those just baffles me. The voice acting is bland and lifeless as well. I actually like a lot of the voice actors. They've done amazing work in other shows, but here it feels like they are just going through the motions. There's no energy, no emotion, nothing to make the dialogue feel real or engaging. I literally cannot think of a single good thing about this arc. Every aspect feels wrong or wasted. The story goes nowhere, the characters are uninteresting, and even the supposedly exciting moments fall flat. From start to finish, it is just one disappointment after another, leaving nothing memorable or enjoyable. If you actually want to watch well-animated shows that respect mythology, skip Sword Art Online and check out Blood of Zeus or Twilight of the Gods. These series take the source material seriously, building rich worlds with interesting characters and stakes that feel real. The animation is stunning, the stories are coherent, and the myths are handled in a way that actually makes sense. Unlike Sword Art Online, you will not be dealing with random inaccuracies, lazy writing, or characters that act without reason. These shows make mythology exciting and worth watching. Mythology is inherently awesome. These stories have survived for centuries because they are powerful, dramatic, and full of meaning. They already come with epic characters, high stakes, and rich worlds built in. If you base your story on mythology and it still turns out boring, messy, or dumb, then that is entirely on you as a writer. You did not have to invent greatness from scratch, it was already handed to you. Failing with source material, this strongly means something went seriously wrong in the execution, whether it was laziness, lack of research, or just bad storytelling choices. The Calibur arc is just another weak arc in a show full of weak arcs. What is almost impressive in the worst way possible is how the series never actually improves. It keeps repeating the same mistakes over and over, hoping viewers will lower their standards instead of expecting better writing, better characters, or better ideas. Instead of learning from past criticism, the show doubles down on everything that made it bad in the first place. This show could have been good if it actually followed the mythology with some care and respect. But instead, the writer clearly thought he could do better than stories that have survived for centuries. That kind of arrogance is honestly laughable. Rather than learning from the myths and building on their strengths, he strips them down, mixes them together at random, and replaces them with shallow game logic and bad writing. The result is not creative or bold. It is just sloppy. When you take timeless material and somehow make it boring and dumb, that is not improvement, it is failure. And if you actually want to watch movies or shows based on Arthurian legend, there are plenty of better alternatives as well. You have stories that actually respect the source material and understand what makes the legend compelling in the first place. Many of them focus on tragedy, honor, betrayal, and the slow collapse of a kingdom rather than treating Excalibur like a shiny loot drop in a bad video game. Compared to those adaptations, Sword Art Online just looks lazy and shallow, grabbing famous names without understanding their meaning. If you want real Arthurian storytelling, you do not need to settle for this watered-down nonsense. The King Arthur, Legend of the Sword movie stands out because it takes a classic myth and reinvents it with bold kinetic energy. Unlike traditional retellings that stick rigidly to familiar imagery, this film injects a modern visual style and edgy sensibility, making the legend feel fresh and alive. The fight choreography is visceral, the cinematography is striking, and the soundtrack gives the story a pulse that matches the high stakes of Arthur's rise from street smart survivor to legendary king. What makes it compelling is how it humanizes Arthur. He is not born perfect or predestined for greatness. He struggles, doubts himself, and fights against corruption and injustice. Watching him grow into the legendary figure we all know gives the story emotional weight beyond just flashy sword fights. It's also a feast for the imagination. The movie doesn't just retell the myth, it rebuilds the world with a mythic, almost fairy tale grandeur. From towering castles to chaotic streets filled with treachery, every location feels alive and dangerous. For anyone who loves epic fantasy, inventive filmmaking, or a fresh take on well-known legends, this movie proves that old myths can feel urgent, dangerous, and surprisingly relatable. In short, it is not just a retelling. It is a reinvention that entertains, thrills, and reminds us why myths endure. They evolve with us. The Green Knight is a masterclass in slow-burn psychological fantasy that transforms the medieval poem, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, into a haunting and immersive cinematic experience. Unlike typical action adaptations, the film focuses on mood, symbolism, and tension, allowing you to feel the weight of honor, mortality, and temptation alongside Gawain. Every frame is meticulously composed with foggy forests, stark winter landscapes, and surreal visions, creating a dreamlike atmosphere that lingers long after the credits roll. What makes it remarkable is how it challenges the audience. It does not spoon-feed answers or moral lessons, but forces viewers to wrestle with uncertainty, fear, and the consequences of choice. Gawain is human, flawed, insecure, and uncertain, and watching him navigate a world where virtue and survival collide makes the story deeply resonant and surprisingly modern. The Green Knight proves that myth and legend can be more than spectacle. They can be introspective, unsettling, and profoundly moving. It is the kind of film that stays with you, inviting reflection on courage, mortality, and the stories we tell to define ourselves. Monty Python and the Holy Grail is an absolute riot. A wildly inventive comedy that takes the legend of King Arthur and throws it into a blender of absurdity, clever satire, and sheer silliness. Unlike conventional retellings, it turns medieval quests into a playground for jokes, delivering laughs that are both ridiculous and surprisingly sharp. What makes it timeless is how it balances the completely absurd with clever commentary. The humor is anarchic and unpredictable, but there is a method to the madness, mocking bureaucracy, blind faith, and the heroic tropes of traditional Arthurian stories. Every scene is packed with visual gags, clever wordplay, and bizarre situations that keep you laughing while also appreciating the creativity behind the chaos. Monty Python and the Holy Grail is not just a comedy, it is a celebration of imagination and irreverence. It invites you to enjoy the story of Arthur in a completely new, unexpected way, proving that even the most revered legends can be hilariously deconstructed. It is a must-watch for anyone who loves sharp wit, absurd comedy, and inventive storytelling. Disney's The Sword and the Stone from 1963 is an animated classic that brings the Arthurian legend to life in a whimsical and imaginative way. The story follows young Arthur, known as Wart, as he learns wisdom, courage, and patience under the guidance of the eccentric wizard Merlin. With charming animation, clever humor, and heartwarming moments, this film is a timeless introduction to the legend and perfect for viewers of all ages. For those who prefer a more grounded and realistic approach, the 2004 film King Arthur offers a historical take on the legend. Instead of magic and fantasy, Arthur is portrayed as a Roman officer in Britain, navigating politics and brutal battles. The cinematography and large-scale action sequences make this film compelling, and it gives viewers a sense of how the Arthurian legends could have roots in real history. If you enjoy gritty historical dramas and intense battle scenes, this one is worth checking out. The 1967 musical Camelot is another standout, especially for fans of classic Hollywood and musicals. It tells the story of Arthur, Guinevere, and Lancelot with grandiose set pieces, emotional performances, and memorable songs. Camelot captures the idealism, romance, and tragic undertones of Arthur's reign. Even if musicals are not your usual style, the drama and spectacle make it a captivating way to experience the legend. The Kid Who Would Be King from 2019 is a fresh and fun take on the Arthurian legend, designed to be accessible to a younger audience while still entertaining for adults. It cleverly blends modern-day London with the magical elements of the classic story, showing a group of kids who discover Excalibur and must rise to the occasion against a resurrected Morgana. What makes this movie great is its balance of humor, heart, and adventure. The characters are relatable, with real-world struggles that make their heroics feel earned rather than handed to them. The action sequences are exciting but not overly intense, making it family-friendly without being boring. Overall, it is a lighthearted yet inspiring retelling that shows the enduring appeal of King Arthur's legend in a contemporary setting. Transformers: The Last Knight is an unusual but intriguing entry in the Transformers franchise because it blends the high-octane robot action the series is known for with elements of Arthurian legend. The movie introduces King Arthur, Excalibur, and the Knights of the Round Table into the Transformers universe, tying human history to the ongoing battle between Autobots and Decepticons. What makes it stand out, despite its flaws, is the sheer spectacle and creativity of merging medieval mythology with futuristic sci-fi. The visual effects are stunning, with massive action sequences, epic battles, and intricate robot designs that keep you engaged. While the story can be convoluted at times, it is entertaining for viewers who enjoy a wild ride and a unique twist on familiar legends. It's a bold attempt to combine history, mythology, and robot chaos in a way that no other blockbuster has done. Scooby-Doo. The Sword and the Scoob is a delightful and surprisingly clever take on Arthurian legend, tailored for a family audience but enjoyable for viewers of all ages. The film keeps the classic Scooby-Doo formula, mystery, humor, and teamwork, while adding a medieval twist with Excalibur, knights, and magical adventures. What makes it great is how it balances lighthearted comedy with an engaging story that introduces young audiences to legendary elements without feeling heavy or preachy. The animation is colorful and expressive, capturing the charm of the characters we all know and love. It also has witty jokes and playful references that adults can appreciate. Overall, it's a fun, accessible, and imaginative way to experience Arthurian myths while following a beloved team of mystery solvers. When it comes to TV shows, there are plenty of fantastic options for Arthurian legends. The BBC series Merlin is a standout. It reimagines the story of young Merlin and Prince Arthur, focusing on their friendship, magical adventures, and the challenges of destiny. The show blends action, humor, and heart, making it accessible for both younger viewers and adults. What makes it especially compelling is how it humanizes the characters, giving depth to Arthur's growth into a wise and noble leader while showing Merlin's struggles with his magical abilities and the secrecy he must maintain. With strong performances, engaging story arcs, and a fresh take on classic tales, Merlin is a must-watch for anyone interested in the legend. The Camelot TV series offers a much darker and more mature take on the Arthurian legends. It dives deep into political intrigue, betrayal, and the rise of King Arthur in a world full of corruption and moral ambiguity. Unlike some adaptations that focus on magic and heroics, Camelot emphasizes the human drama behind the legend, showing the difficult choices, alliances, and conflicts that shaped Arthur's reign. The characters are complex, with personal flaws and ambitions that make their journeys feel realistic and compelling. High production values, stunning costumes, and moody cinematography add to the immersive experience. If you enjoy a gritty, character-driven reimagining of King Arthur's story, Camelot is definitely worth checking out. It makes no sense to include elements from other mythologies in a story that is supposed to be based on Norse mythology. That would be like writing a story about ancient Egypt and suddenly having Greek gods walking around, or making a Roman emperor appear in feudal Japan. It completely breaks the consistency of the world. and shows that the author either did not care about the source material or did not bother to do even basic research. Norse mythology already has fascinating gods, monsters, and legends. There is no need to mix in random unrelated elements that only confuse the story. It makes you wonder what the author was thinking and why he thought this was a good idea. Did he not realize how much it ruins the story? Or did he just not care about making a coherent and enjoyable world? Either way, it shows a shocking lack of judgment and respect for the material he supposedly based the story on. The author has already admitted in various interviews that he does not plan things out beforehand, and it really shows. The story feels sloppy and messy because there is no clear structure or logical progression. Scenes jump from one event to another with little explanation or purpose, leaving viewers confused and frustrated. Character actions are inconsistent, motivations are unclear, and plot points are introduced only to be abandoned or ignored. Without proper planning, the world building suffers as well. Game mechanics, mythology, and settings contradict themselves constantly. It feels like the story exists just to string together random moments rather than to tell a coherent, engaging narrative. This lack of foresight makes the arc not only frustrating to watch, but also painfully shallow and unsatisfying. Just avoid Sword Art Online entirely. There are far better ways to spend your time than sitting through a show that is sloppy, full of inconsistencies, and painfully boring. You could be watching anime with strong storytelling, well-developed characters, and engaging worlds. Or even exploring other media that actually respects its source material and puts thought into its plot. Sword Art Online wastes your time with endless exposition, bad game mechanics, and lazy writing. Skipping it will save you frustration and let you focus on content that is actually entertaining and worth your attention. For people who genuinely like this show and continue to watch it, I honestly have to ask why. Is it because of nostalgia, because it was one of the first anime you watched? Or because you are so invested that you feel obligated to stick with it? Because when you actually stop and look at what Sword Art Online is doing, especially in arcs like Calibur, it is hard to justify the time spent on it. The writing is sloppy, the characters are shallow, and the story constantly undermines its own ideas. What makes it even more baffling is that there are so many better alternatives out there. There are anime with stronger world building, tighter plots, more respectful use of mythology, and characters who actually grow and earn their moments. Choosing to keep defending or watching Sword Art Online feels less like a matter of taste and more like settling for something mediocre when far better options exist. It makes absolutely no sense how this show got so popular. Its success is a perfect example that popularity does not equal quality. Just because a series has flashy action scenes or a catchy concept does not mean it is well written, coherent, or enjoyable to watch. Sword Art Online is proof that a big fanbase and widespread attention can exist entirely independent of actual substance. The Sword Art Online fanbase is terrible too. They refuse to acknowledge any flaws in the show. To them, Sword Art Online is the pinnacle of human creativity. The absolute best thing ever made. It is flawless, beyond criticism, and apparently so perfect that it does not even require defense, because obviously everyone already adores it and nobody could possibly hate it. The level of delusion is staggering. They treat minor issues, lazy writing, and glaring inconsistencies as if they are irrelevant or non-existent. It is almost comical, but also infuriating. Fans like this need to grow up and confront reality. Just because something is popular does not mean it is immune to criticism, and the world does not revolve around their obsession. Sword Art Online undeniably has one of the most toxic and obsessive fanbases of all time. It is so bad that even the fans do not like each other. You know a fanbase has reached peak disaster when members of the same group cannot get along, cannot agree on anything, and constantly argue over trivial points. Instead of enjoying the show, they spend more time policing each other, gatekeeping, and insisting that anyone who criticizes it is wrong or hating. It is a mess, and it reflects just how unhealthy fandom culture can get when obsession overrides common sense. I was digging through some Reddit threads from when this anime first aired over a decade ago and stumbled across a goldmine of hilarious comments, tearing apart just how awful and absurd it is. People were mercilessly roasting everything from the writing to the characters to the logic of the game world. Let us go through some of the best ones and laugh together at the sheer train wreck that is Sword Art Online. The first comment claims that Kirito lifted Thor's hammer, and even Captain America could not do that. That is absolutely hilarious. Kirito is supposedly so overpowered that he can lift Thor's hammer, the ultimate symbol of worthiness. In Avengers Endgame, Captain America does the exact same thing. Of course, this comment was made years before Endgame came out, so the person would not have known that, but looking back, it is just too funny. The sheer absurdity of people taking Kirito's power seriously is almost comical. This commenter agrees with me that the quest was way too easy. They pointed out that the new dungeon was cleared by the very first group of players. Every boss was defeated on the first attempt, and the party did not suffer a single death. That is absurd from a gameplay perspective. In a real MMO, it would never be this easy. The whole thing is just a parade of luck and plot armor disguised as skill. And it makes no sense for a supposedly challenging quest to fall apart so effortlessly. This comment points out that Log Horizon is a far better representation of MMOs than Sword Art Online. Another commenter nailed it by saying that Log Horizon is a fantasy set inside an MMO, while Sword Art Online is a fantasy world that just likes to pretend it is an MMO. That is both hilarious and painfully accurate. Sword Art Online tries so hard to feel epic and grand, but in reality, it is completely flat and awful. The show wants to be a legendary adventure, yet ends up feeling like a hollow imitation that forgets what makes an MMO actually interesting. This comment perfectly sums up how terrible the boss battle was. The tank just stood in the back doing nothing and did not even use any support skills. The archer, for some reason, decided to kick the boss with a melee attack. 2 party members attacked only once during the entire fight. The top DPS was not even a player, it was an NPC, and the player who got the hammer drop did not give it to anyone who could actually use it. And that is just scratching the surface. There is even more absurdity I have already covered in the video. Honestly, this fight is a masterclass in how to make a supposedly epic battle look completely incompetent. Other commenters agree that Lisbeth is completely stupid, and the scene where she gushes over Klein is pure nonsensical otaku pandering. And they are right. No real woman would ever think Klein is impressive. He is a loser, a desperate simp, and yet the show treats him like he is somehow worthy of admiration. It is absurd, cringeworthy, and perfectly highlights how the show rewards the most pathetic characters while pretending it is telling an epic story. Other commenters also seem completely confused about where Kirito threw the sword. I have already covered this in the video, and for good reason, it makes no sense at all. The scene is just bad writing, sloppy, and nonsensical, like the show is trying to be dramatic but fails spectacularly. It is moments like this that make the show feel more like a parody of itself than an actual story. One commenter pointed out the scene where Sinon flips her bow around after shooting it. They are right that this is a Japanese-style move, but she was using a European bow, so it should not behave like that at all. It is another example of the show ignoring reality for style points. The comment also mentions that the creators clearly do not know the difference between Calibur and Excalibur, which I have already covered in the video. It is just more sloppy, careless writing piled on top of the endless absurdities. People were also complaining that this arc is just the characters playing a game with no real stakes, which I have already discussed in the video. Some viewers might find it relaxing, but to me, it is painfully boring. The show is supposed to be about a deadly game where lives are on the line, not some casual video game session with zero tension. Sword Art Online keeps pretending it is thrilling, but moments like this make it clear that the series has completely lost its sense of danger and drama. Other viewers also found the episode pretty cringe, especially the moment when Kirito pulls out Excalibur and everyone starts yelling like he just accomplished some incredible feat of strength. I have to agree, that scene is absolutely hilarious. It is hard to take Sword Art Online seriously when it treats a completely ordinary action as if it were the climax of an epic saga. The show's attempt at grandeur ends up looking ridiculously overblown and unintentionally funny. Tons of people were facepalming when Kirito threw the sword away, since that was literally the whole reason they went on the quest in the first place. It was completely arbitrary, and viewers were left questioning why they were still watching this train wreck. I get it, same here. At least I watch it because tearing it apart is my job. I would never watch this show for fun. There are literally millions of other options that do not insult your intelligence or treat epic quests like a casual stroll in the park. Other commenters also hated the part where Sinon asks Kirito to think about her in exchange for the sword, which I have to agree is extremely cringe. It is the kind of awkward, forced fanservice moment that makes you wonder if the writers were trying too hard to be dramatic while completely missing the mark. Sword Art Online keeps inserting these pointless romantic pandering scenes, and it only makes the show feel more ridiculous. People were also annoyed that Agile appeared in the final scene but did not say a single word. And they are right. What is even the point of animating him if he does not feel like a real part of the story? It is just another example of Sword Art Online throwing in fan-favorite characters for appearances, while completely ignoring any meaningful interaction or contribution. The show treats its own cast like props, and it is painfully obvious. People were also confused about how Sinon was able to do so much DPS and pull aggro, even though she is supposedly a new player. Some think it is because her stats from Gun Gale Online somehow carry over, but even that does not make sense. She is not the most powerful player, yet the show treats her like a walking damage machine. It is just another example of Sword Art Online ignoring logic and balance to make its favorite characters look impressive for no reason. What is truly funny is how my analysis of this arc ended up being far longer than the arc itself. When it takes longer to explain all the problems, plot holes, and absurdities than it does to actually watch the arc, that is a huge red flag. It perfectly sums up the issue with Sword Art Online. An arc that is meant to feel epic and exciting ends up being so shallow and poorly executed that it cannot even fill the time it takes to criticize it. The show thinks it is grand and heroic, but in reality, it is flimsy, ridiculous, and begging to be torn apart. You could say that I am just being nitpicky, but I would have to strongly disagree. If a story cannot even get the tiny details right, then it is not a good story. I wanted to be thorough and go over everything, because the mistakes are not minor, they are everywhere, and they add up to a narrative that is sloppy, lazy, and frustrating. Ignoring these issues would be doing a disservice to anyone trying to take the show seriously. This show is an insult to just about everyone. Mythology fans hate it. Gamers hate it. People who enjoy good storytelling hate it. Anyone over the age of 5 hates it. And anyone with even a shred of common sense hates it. Sword Art Online tries to be epic and serious, but it ends up being a sloppy, cringe-filled mess that manages to annoy basically every type of viewer out there. You have to wonder who is actually enjoying this show. Are they all just bots or something? At this point, the dead internet theory might actually be true. It is hard to imagine a single rational human willingly sitting through this mess and calling it entertaining. Sword Art Online seems designed to frustrate, confuse, and bore anyone with a functioning sense of logic. I suffered through this dumpster fire so you do not have to. Avoid this garbage at all costs if you value your time and your sanity. And do not get it twisted. It is not even so bad it is good, like The Room. It is just bad. Pure, unfunny, exhausting bad. Sword Art Online does not even earn the right to be entertainingly awful. It is just a tedious slog from start to finish. Was it worth spending this much time watching the show, writing the script, and editing this video? Probably not. But I had to do it to satisfy my rage. That is the only thing keeping me going at this point. Watching this arc was painful, breaking it down was exhausting, and editing it felt like punishment. And yet tearing it apart piece by piece was the only way to stay sane after sitting through something this bad. At times I felt like Sisyphus from Greek mythology endlessly pushing a boulder uphill. But I had to keep going. I had to tear this garbage apart and expose its flaws so the fans could finally see the truth. This show is not perfect. Far from it. It is riddled with mistakes, plot holes, and absurdities at every turn, and someone has to point them out. If my video convinces even one person not to watch this show, then it was worth every second. I have saved someone from the hardship, the torment, and the sheer frustration of sitting through this train wreck. One less viewer falling into Sword Art Online's trap is a victory in my book. I only wish someone had been there to tell me to avoid this show from the very beginning. It would have saved me so much pain. I want to be that person for others. If I could go back in time, I would not chase money or fame. My only decision would be to prevent myself from ever watching this disaster of a show. Saving even one person from experiencing Sword Art Online's nonsense would be worth more than any reward I could have chased. The sad part is that Sword Art Online fans see me as a bad person. They think I am the enemy. But in reality, I am just trying to help people make better choices, guiding them towards shows that are actually worth their time and away from something that wastes it. I am not the villain here. I am the only person trying to save viewers from hours of nonsense, poor writing, and needless frustration. The real problem is the fans who act like this is the greatest show of all time and think everyone must watch it. They treat any criticism like a personal attack, as if the show is above all judgment. The idea that people are not allowed to criticize it is laughable, and honestly, it only makes me want to tear it apart even more. If a show cannot survive criticism, then it was never that good to begin with. These fans are just too young to understand the world. I am sure that eventually, when they grow up and maybe compare notes with others, they will realize how terrible this show really is and finally see the light. Sword Art Online might feel impressive to them now, but time and experience have a way of exposing just how shallow and absurd it really is. Let us take a look at much better anime to watch instead of Sword Art Online. These shows have similar premises, but they actually execute their ideas well, with stronger writing, better characters, and a clearer understanding of what makes virtual world stories interesting instead of frustrating.
Number 1. Excel World. Haruyuki Arita is an overweight, bullied middle schooler who finds solace in playing online games. But his life takes a drastic turn one day when he finds that all his high scores have been touted by Kuroyuki Hime, the popular vice president of the student council. She then invites him to the student lounge and introduces him to Brain Burst, a program which allows the users to accelerate their brainwaves to the point where time seems to stop. Brain Burst also functions as an augmented reality fighting game, and in order to get more points to accelerate, users must win duels against other players. However, if a user loses all their points, they will also lose access to Brain Burst forever. Kuroyuki Hime explains that she chose to show Haruyuki the program because she needs his help. She wants to meet the creator of Brain Burst and uncover the reason why it was created, but that's easier said than done. To do so, she must defeat the 6 kings of pure color, powerful faction leaders within the game, and reach level 10, the highest level attainable. After the girl helps Haruyuki overcome the bullies that torment him, he vows to help her realize her goal. And so begins the duo's fight to reach the top. So, why is Excel World similar to Sword Art Online? Well, first of all, Sword Art Online and Excel World were both written by the same author, Reki Kawahara. Both anime take place in the future and the main characters have similar goals. In Sword Art Online, Kirito's goal is to clear the game so that he and everyone else can escape. In Excel World, Haruyuki's goal is to become the first player to get level 10, so that he can find out why Brain Burst was created. Furthermore, Sword Art Online and Excel World are both about virtual video game worlds, and they both share similar styles and themes. The game for both of these series starts out to be seemingly fun. Then, as the story progresses, the games become a lot more than just games. The characters in Sword Art Online and Excel World are playing the games for much more than just entertainment purposes. Additionally, both Kirito and Haruyuki start off as loners. However, as the story goes on, they realize that a lot more people care about them and they learn to open up towards others. Number 2. Log Horizon. In the blink of an eye, 30,000 bewildered Japanese gamers are whisked from their everyday lives into the world of the popular MMORPG Elder Tale. After the game's latest update, unable to log out. Among them is the socially awkward college student Shiro, whose confusion and shock lasts only a moment. As a veteran of the game, he immediately sets out to explore the limits of his new reality. Shiro must learn to live in this new world, leading others and negotiating with the NPC natives in order to bring stability to the virtual city of Akihabara. He is joined by his unfortunate friend Natsugu, having logged in for the first time in years only to find himself trapped, and Akatsuki, a petite but fierce assassin who labels Shiro as her master. A tale of fantasy, adventure, and politics. Log Horizon explores the elements of gaming through the eyes of a master strategist who attempts to make the best of a puzzling situation. So, why is Log Horizon similar to Sword Art Online? Well, that should be fairly obvious. In both series, the characters are stuck in a virtual reality MMORPG, and they're unable to log out. In both series, the players are looking for a way to escape the game world. The main difference here is that the characters in Log Horizon don't die in real life if they die in the game. If a character in Log Horizon dies, they will just simply respawn. Other than that, both anime are pretty similar. Number 3. Hunter x Hunter Greed Island. After the battle with the spiders, the search for Jin continues as Gon and Killua decided to once again attempt to purchase the rare game Greed Island. However, Gon came up with a better plan, which was to volunteer to complete the game for the billionaire who owned it. But some training must be done as Gon and Killua's abilities are still at a developing stage. And Greed Island is no simple game for anyone to play with. It is the infamous game that could easily lead to one's death. So why is Hunter x Hunter Greed Island similar to Sword Art Online? Well, both of these series are about characters being trapped in a video game. In order to escape, they must make it to a certain point to clear the game. In Sword Art Online, the players have to clear all the floors and defeat the final boss. In Hunter x Hunter Greed Island, the players can only escape when they win the game, or if they use a special card in the game that lets them out. Furthermore, in both anime, if the players die in the game, then they also die in real life. Number 4. Dot Hack Sign. A young wave master only known by the alias of Tsukasa wakes up in an MMORPG called The World, with slight amnesia. He does not know what he has previously done before he woke up. In The World, the Crimson Knights suspect him of being a hacker, as he was seen accompanying a tweet character in the form of a cat. Unable to log out from the game, he wanders around looking for answers, avoiding the knights and other players he meets along the way. As Tsukasa explores the world, he stumbles upon a magical item that takes the form of a guardian, which promises him protection from all harm. Subaru, the leader of the Crimson Knights, along with several other players who become acquainted with Tsukasa, set out to investigate why Tsukasa is unable to log out, and attempt to get to the bottom of the problem before it gets out of hand. So why is Dot Hack Sign similar to Sword Art Online? Well, both anime take place in a virtual reality MMORPG, and they share many other elements. In both series, there's characters stuck in the game and they're unable to log out. Furthermore, Sword Art Online and Dot Hack Sign share the same composer, Yuki Kajira. The main difference is that Dot Hack Sign is definitely more of a mystery, and it's a lot more dialogue heavy. Sword Art Online, on the other hand, has a lot more action. Number 5. Overlord. The final hour of the popular virtual reality game Yggdrasil has come. However, Momonga, a powerful wizard and master of the Dark Guild Ainz Ul Gaun, decides to spend his last moments in the game as the servers begin to shut down. To his surprise, despite the clock being struck midnight, Momonga is still fully conscious as his character. And moreover, the non-player characters appear to have developed personalities of their own. Confronted with this abnormal situation, Momonga commands his loyal servants to help him investigate and take control of this new world, with the hopes of figuring out what has caused this development and if there may be others in the same predicament. So why is Overlord similar to Sword Art Online? Well, both anime take place in the future, and they're about characters being trapped in a virtual reality MMORPG. In both series, the main character is extremely strong. Sword Art Online is about a group of 10,000 players that get trapped in the game, while Overlord is about one character trapped in the game. Although the number of players trapped is drastically different in both of these anime, the characters are trying to adapt and survive in the game world. The main difference is that the goals in each anime are completely different. The goal in Overlord is pretty much the complete opposite. In Overlord, the main character Momonga is trying to explore and take control of the game world. Alright guys, that's it for this list. Which anime mentioned in this list is your favorite? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications for my channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.